When I looked down at the empty formula can, I felt my world shrink to the size of that tiny, cold metal cylinder. It was New Year's Eve in the Bronx, and the only sounds in my apartment were the distant hum of sirens outside and the sharp, desperate cries of my daughter, Aria, 8 months old and hungry. She was curled up in the corner of the peeling vinyl kitchen floor, her little fists pounding the air like she was trying to reach for something that wasn't there. I sat on the threadbare couch, the eviction notice taped to the wall behind me like a grim reminder of how far I'd fallen. $3.27 in my pocket, a baby with a stomach that needed filling, and no idea where to turn next. I pulled out my phone, fingers trembling as I typed a message that felt more like a prayer. A shot in the dark. "Florence, please. I don't know what else to do." I didn't even realize I'd sent it to the wrong number until hours later, until my doorbell rang, piercing the stillness like an unexpected beacon of hope. The knock was soft, almost hesitant. When I opened the door, I wasn't prepared for the man standing there. Roman Thorne, a billionaire, cloaked in a dark overcoat, his eyes carrying the weight of a grief I recognized, but rarely met someone who had seen the worst and was trying to make it right. He didn't hand me a check or an offer of charity wrapped in strings. Instead, he brought bags heavy with formula, diapers, food, no speeches, no pity, just quiet kindness. "Isla?" His voice was calm, measured, but there was an urgency beneath it that made my heart stutter. "How did you?" "I got your message," he said simply. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like relief. "My name is Isla Vance, a single mother who's been fighting for every breath of dignity in a city that often feels like it's swallowing me whole." This story begins in that small Bronx apartment on the coldest New Year's Eve I've ever known. But it's not just about survival, it's about the invisible threads that connect us all, the betrayals we don't see coming, and the fragile hope we cling to when the night feels endless. Before that night, my life was a delicate balancing act. I woke every morning before dawn, the smell of burnt coffee and leftover cereal filling our cramped kitchen. Arya's soft breathing beside me was a comfort, even when exhaustion pulled at my bones like a relentless tide. I worked as a junior accountant at Chandler Financial, a small firm downtown. The pay wasn't great, but it kept us afloat. Mostly. The office was a cold, gray place, filled with the drone of keyboards and the clipped voices of people who had forgotten how to smile. My boss, Mr. Chandler, was a man of few words but many rules, and the other employees treated me like I was just another cog in the machine. Still, I clung to the hope that my work mattered, that maybe one day, things would get better. At home, I had Aria. Her tiny hands, her bright eyes. The way she laughed at the sound of my voice, it was everything. Even when the walls felt like they were closing in, she was my reason to keep going. But things began to shift quietly, like a shadow stretching across the floor. It started with strange discrepancies in the company's books transactions that didn't add up. Numbers that seemed deliberately hidden beneath layers of paperwork. When I mentioned them to my supervisor, Spencer Cole, he brushed me off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're overthinking it, Isla," he said. "Focus on your work." But I knew better. Spencer was charming. Everyone said so. His laugh was loud and confident. His suits always sharp. But there was a coldness under the surface. A ruthlessness I caught glimpses of in the way he talked about money, power, and control. I began digging, staying late nights after the office emptied out, piecing together the irregularities I found. The more I looked, the more I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. And then came the day I was called into Chandler's office. "You're done here," Mr. Chandler said, without preamble. My heart sank. "Why?" He looked away. "We don't need people asking questions. You're causing problems." I wanted to scream, to argue, but I swallowed the lump in my throat and packed my things in silence. The cold winter air bit at my face as I walked out, the city around me bustling and oblivious. I had no savings, no safety net. Just Arya, her hungry cries echoing in my mind, and the faint hope that someone, anyone, would see the truth. That's when I sent the message, and that's when Roman came. When he arrived that night, he didn't ask questions. He just listened. I told him everything, the job, the firing, the suspicious transactions that mirrored something he'd mentioned about his own charity, the Anchor Trust. He looked at me with a mix of pain and determination. "We'll fix this," he said. "Together." And just like that, my life began to change. Roman didn't just bring formula that night. He brought something I hadn't felt in months, a thread of hope, delicate but real, that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. The next morning, while Arya slept in her stroller by the window, Roman laid out a proposition that made my head spin. He wanted me to work with him, not as a charity case, not as a favor, but as a partner. He believed the irregularities I found weren't just Chandler Financial's problem, they were tied to his own foundation, the Anchor Trust. a multi-million-dollar charity he had built in memory of his mother, who had died alone and forgotten in poverty. Spencer Cole, Roman said quietly, is my CFO. And if what you're saying is true, he's been stealing from the very people we're trying to help. I stared at him, the weight of his words settling like a stone in my chest. The idea of stepping into a world I barely understood. Going up against a man like Spencer, it was terrifying. But it was also the chance to fight back. For Arya. For myself. For everyone who needed a voice. My days turned into a blur of late nights and whispered phone calls. Roman gave me access to the Anchor Trust records, and together, we started unraveling the web Spencer had spun. Each discovery cut deeper the money meant for shelters, food programs, emergency aid. It was all being siphoned off into secret accounts and shell companies. I remembered the faces of the families I'd met when I volunteered at Sanctuary House, a shelter supported by the Anchor Trust. The fear in their eyes, the desperation in their voices, it wasn't just numbers on a page. It was real lives being torn apart. One evening, Roman and I met Leo Torres, a former accountant who'd quietly blown the whistle on Spencer's scheme. Leo's hands trembled as he handed over documents that confirmed the theft. I didn't want to get involved, Leo said, voice low and guarded. But watching those people suffer, I couldn't stay silent. His courage was a beacon. And for the first time, I felt like we had a real chance. Roman and I began planning how to expose Spencer without tipping him off. Every conversation was cautious, every step measured. But the deeper we dug, the more dangerous it became. Spencer wasn't just smart, he was ruthless. One afternoon, I found my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, but nothing was missing. Just a message scrawled on my kitchen wall in Sharpie. Back off. I swallowed my fear, knowing that I couldn't. Not now. Arya's hungry cries echoed from her crib, pulling me back to what mattered most. Roman became my anchor in the storm. He never asked me to be anything but myself. And slowly, our alliance grew into something neither of us expected. A quiet companionship forged in shared pain and relentless determination. We talked about our pasts, his mother, the woman who inspired the Anchor Trust, and my own struggles as a mother trying to build a life out of broken pieces. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't in years, trusting him with the parts of me I'd kept hidden. Then came the night we confronted Spencer. It was at a gala for the Anchor Trust, an event where charity met power in a glossy, polished dance. Spencer was there, the picture of confidence, surrounded by people who admired him. Roman and I stood together, armed with the evidence in Leo's testimony. When I presented the documents to the board, the room fell silent. Spencer's mask cracked, anger flashing in his eyes. But the truth was undeniable. He was escorted out, the betrayal exposed for all to see. After the dust settled, Roman offered me the leadership of the Anchor Trust. It was more than a job. It was a chance to make sure the mission his mother had started was fulfilled with integrity. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, but so did a fierce pride. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something that could change lives. A year later, Roman, Arya, and I watched the New Year's fireworks from the penthouse that had become our home. The city sparkled beneath us, and in that moment, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. From an empty formula can to a family made whole not by wealth, but by trust, courage, and the stubborn refusal to give up. When I saw the empty formula can sitting on the kitchen table that night, I didn't just see a container, I saw everything I was losing. The nights before had been endless. Arya's cries, sharp and unrelenting, echoed in the tiny Bronx apartment, bouncing off the cracked plaster walls like a painful reminder of what I couldn't provide. The faint smell of powdered milk lingering in the air, mixed with the cold winter chill creeping in through the window seams. I was exhausted, drained, and drowning in a sea of hopelessness I didn't know how to escape. I pressed my forehead against the cold kitchen tile, tasting the bitterness of despair. The eviction notice stared back at me from the wall, its black ink stark and unforgiving. $3.27 jingled in my pocket, a cruel joke from a universe that had forgotten me. I grabbed my phone and typed out the message. Florence, please, I'm lost. But I sent it to the wrong number. Oman Thorne answered, a man who carried his own scars behind a veil of power and money. When he appeared on my doorstep that cold night, it felt like the world shifted slightly, a crack in the darkness where light could finally slip through. He didn't bring pity or charity. Instead, he brought formula, food, and a quiet promise. No strings attached. His eyes held a sadness I understood. And in that moment, something fragile started to grow hope. Before everything fell apart, I had a routine. I woke up to Arya's soft breathing beside me, the muted sounds of the city waking up outside the window. Working at Chandler Financial was a grind, but it was steady. I'd learned to navigate the cold indifference of the office, to keep my head down, and to do my job well enough to survive. Spencer Cole, the CFO, was always around a man with a smooth smile and an edge that made people uncomfortable if they looked too closely. He held power like a weapon, and I didn't understand just how far he was willing to go. The first clue came when I noticed the odd transactions in the company accounts, small amounts disappearing here and there, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. I brought it up with Spencer, hoping for an explanation. "Don't waste your time," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't want to get involved." But I was already involved. The day I was fired was the day the illusion shattered. No warnings. No chance to explain. Just a cold dismissal. I was terrified. How would I feed Arya? Pay the rent? That's when I sent the message. And when Roman came, working with him was surreal. He gave me access to the Anchor Trust financials. And together, we began peeling back layers of lies. Each discovery felt like a punch to the gut. Shelters losing funds. Families left without aid. Lives on the line. Meeting Leo Torres was a turning point. His fear was real. The threat from Spencer had silenced him for too long. But handing over those documents was an act of courage. Together, we planned how to expose Spencer. The threat started soon after. A message on my kitchen wall. "Back off." Fear crept in. But the thought of Arya kept me grounded. Roman's presence became my anchor. We shared stories of loss, pain, and hope. At the gala, exposing Spencer was like pulling off a bandage ripped too fast. The room froze. Spencer's fury was palpable, but truth was undeniable. Now, leading the Anchor Trust, I carry the weight of responsibility and hope. From that cold night with an empty formula can to a future filled with promise, this journey has been about more than survival. It's about fighting for the lives we touch and the families we hold close. I still remember the exact moment my heart broke that winter morning, the moment I realized I was utterly alone in a battle I didn't choose but had no choice but to fight. It was a Thursday, the day after I'd been fired from Chandler Financial. The biting cold outside matched the chill settling deep inside me. I carried Arya in my arms, her tiny body pressing against mine as if she could sense the storm raging inside. The eviction notice on our apartment door felt like a final verdict. I ran my fingers over the faded lettering, the paper rough beneath my skin. How did it come to this? Days blurred together. I'd stare out the window at the bustling streets of the Bronx, the world moving forward without me, while I was stuck in a shrinking space of fear and uncertainty. Roman was the first person who believed me, not just about the embezzlement, but about me. When he showed up that night with bags of formula and food, his face was soft but determined. He didn't want anything from me, only to help. "Isla," he said, "I don't want charity. I want to fix this. Together." His faith in me was a balm to my battered spirit. Working alongside Roman was unlike anything I'd known. He moved with the precision of a man used to control, but underneath, I saw the scars his mother's death had left. She had died in poverty, abandoned by the world, and Roman had built the Anchor Trust to make sure no one else suffered like that. The irony wasn't lost on me that the man trying to save others was fighting his own demons. As we dug deeper, the truth became darker. Spencer's betrayal was more than financial, it was personal. Every dollar stolen was a broken promise to the families who depended on the trust. I spent hours combing through records, piecing together a puzzle of greed and deception. Each discovery tightened the knot of anger and sadness in my chest. Leo Torres was a lifeline. When he handed over the damning documents, I saw the fear in his eyes, but also the relief of someone finally doing the right thing. His courage gave me strength. But Spencer was watching. The message scrawled on my kitchen wall was a warning I couldn't ignore. I felt the eyes of danger lurking in every shadow. Roman stood by me through it all. We shared quiet moments in his office, speaking of loss, resilience, and the hope that kept us going. Our alliance was more than professional, it was healing. The night we confronted Spencer at the gala was surreal. Surrounded by the city's elite, I laid out the evidence. The room held its breath as Spencer's facade crumbled. The aftermath was bittersweet. Spencer was gone, but the scars remained. Roman offered me the leadership of the Anchor Trust, a chance to rebuild. Standing on the penthouse balcony a year later, I held Arya close as fireworks lit the sky. From desperation to hope, from loneliness to family. Our journey was a testament to the power of compassion and courage. There's a quiet moment I keep coming back to, the one right after Spencer was exposed, when the room seemed to hold its breath, and I realized just how far I'd come. I was standing beside Roman, the evidence laid bare on the conference table. The faces around us were a mix of shock, disbelief, and something I hadn't expected: respect. It wasn't just about catching a thief. It was about fighting for the truth, for the families counting on the Anchor Trust to be their lifeline. But victory wasn't simple. Spencer's betrayal had left wounds deep enough to take time to heal. The board was fractured. Trust had been broken, not just in the organization, but in the very idea of charity. Roman looked at me that night and said, "This is more than a job, Isla. It's a mission. You're the one who can lead us through." The weight of his words settled heavily on my shoulders. Taking the helm of the Anchor Trust was daunting. I was no longer just a struggling single mother. I was a leader with a responsibility to protect vulnerable lives. The first weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and rebuilding relationships with shelters like Sanctuary House. Every decision felt critical, every mistake potentially devastating. At home, things began to change too. Roman, Aria, and I started building something new. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of doubt. Late nights filled with worry, but there was laughter too. Soft and genuine. One evening, as Aria slept soundly between us, Roman reached out and took my hand. "No matter what happens," he said, "we're in this together." Those words carried a promise I hadn't dared to hope for. The memories of that desperate New Year's Eve still haunt me. Sometimes the empty formula can. The eviction notice. The fear. But they don't define me. What defines me is the choice I made to fight, to trust, to believe in something better. Leading the Anchor Trust, I've seen firsthand how corruption can poison even the noblest intentions. But I've also seen resilience, the fierce determination of families, volunteers, and workers who refuse to give up. Roman's own journey to redemption reminds me every day that healing is possible, even from the darkest wounds. Together, we're making sure the Anchor Trust lives up to its promise. A year later, watching the fireworks explode over the city, I realized that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up when you need them most. The morning after Spencer's public downfall was strange. The city outside my window carried on, oblivious to the storm we had just weathered. But inside the Anchor Trust's walls, everything felt different, lighter, yet fragile, as if we were standing on the edge of a new beginning. I woke to Aria's soft coos, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the faint hum of winter wind outside. Roman was already at his desk, poring over new plans, the weight of the past months etched in the lines of his face. We didn't speak much at first. There was a quiet understanding that actions mattered more than words. The news spread fast. Board members, volunteers, and families connected to the Anchor Trust watched closely, their trust shaken but eager to believe again. I began receiving messages, thank yous, support, cautious optimism. It was humbling. For the first time, I wasn't just the fired accountant or the desperate mother. I was a symbol of hope and change. The hardest part wasn't the exposure of Spencer's betrayal. It was the work to rebuild. I spent hours meeting with shelter directors like Florence Novak, ensuring funds would reach those who needed them most. I saw firsthand the faces of people whose lives depended on us, the single mother clutching her toddler, the veteran seeking shelter, the children whose laughter had been muted by hardship. Their stories grounded me. Their trust fueled me. Roman and I grew closer through the work. We were both haunted by loss, his mother's untimely death, my own struggles to protect Aria in a harsh world. Our late-night conversations stretched into early mornings, filled with shared fears and cautious dreams. One night, as snow fell softly outside the penthouse windows, Roman reached out and held my hand. "We're not perfect," he said, voice low, "but we're building something real. Together." Despite the healing, scars remained. There were nights when doubt crept in, when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But in those moments, I thought of Aria, the promise she represented, the future we were fighting for. The Anchor Trust began to flourish again, its mission sharper and more urgent. We implemented stricter oversight, transparent audits, and community engagement programs. I made sure every dollar was accounted for, every voice heard. The city watched us rebuild, slowly restoring faith in the organization. Roman and I balanced the challenges of leadership with the delicate work of building a family. Aria's laughter filled our home, a soundtrack of hope and renewal. As the next new year approached, I found myself standing beside Roman on the penthouse balcony, the city alive with anticipation. Fireworks exploded overhead, their brilliant colors reflecting in Aria's wide eyes. In that moment, I felt the weight of the past lifting, replaced by a quiet peace. Our journey hadn't been easy. It was marked by pain, betrayal, and fear. But it was also filled with courage, trust, and the unyielding strength of family. The year after Spencer's fall was a lesson in resilience, both for the Anchor Trust and for me. The chaos that had once consumed my life slowly gave way to order, hope, and purpose. Leading the trust wasn't just a job. It was a mission I carried deep in my bones. Every morning, I woke to Aria's soft breathing and the city's quiet stir, reminding me of what I was fighting for. Rebuilding trust was a slow, painstaking process. I spent countless hours with shelter, directors, volunteers, and families, listening to their stories and learning from their struggles. Florence Novak became not just a colleague, but a friend, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there were people willing to stand by you. The lessons I learned were hard. Corruption doesn't just steal money, it steals hope. But integrity, courage, and compassion could rebuild it. Roman and I grew closer in ways I hadn't expected. Our shared past, his mother's death. My fight for Aria wove us together into something stronger than either of us imagined. We learned to trust again, to lean on each other in moments of doubt. There were challenges. Of course, leading an organization like the Anchor Trust meant difficult decisions, late nights, and the weight of responsibility pressing down. But through it all, the little moments kept me grounded, the sound of Arya's laughter, Roman's steady presence, the warmth of a home filled with love. I learned that family isn't always born, it's made. It's built from trust, patience, and the willingness to fight for something greater than yourself. On the anniversary of that desperate New Year's Eve, Roman, Arya, and I stood together watching the fireworks light up the city. The sky exploded with color, a brilliant reminder that even after the darkest nights, light could return. I thought about the empty formula can, the eviction notice, the fear that had once consumed me, and I realized how far we'd come. This story isn't just mine, it's about every person who's ever faced despair and chosen to fight back. It's about the power of compassion, the strength of community, and the quiet miracles that happen when we refuse to give up. Thank you for walking this journey with me from the cold, desperate nights in that small Bronx apartment to the warmth of a family built on trust and hope. I've shared my story not just to tell you what happened to me, but to remind us all of something powerful. Even when the world feels like it's closing in, even when the shadows seem endless, there's always a way forward. Sometimes, that path begins with a single act of kindness, a hand reaching out when you least expect it. Sometimes, it starts with the courage to speak up even when your voice shakes. Isla, Roman, and Arya's story is about more than money or power. It's about the invisible threads that connect us, the moments when strangers become allies, when pain becomes strength, and when brokenness becomes a foundation for something new. I want to ask you, have you ever felt like your world was shrinking, like hope was slipping through your fingers? What did you do in that moment? Who reached out to you? Or who did you reach out to? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Your stories matter. They remind us that none of us are truly alone. If this story touched you, consider subscribing for more voices, real stories of struggle, resilience, and the quiet courage that changes lives. Remember, sometimes, the smallest light can break the darkest night. Would you have done what Isla did? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you again for listening.